Here is a Jamestown baseball story. Mark, I brought him down, and it was during the time period of the Jamestown Jammers. And they had a situation where during the seventh inning, they asked people to participate and take me out to the ball game. The general manager, who I knew from St. Bonaventure, was walking by. I said, "You have no idea who you have here," but the guy sitting next to me is Mark Russell. And I said, "Why don't you call your grandparents right now and tell them you're shaking the hands of Mark Russell? They will be impressed." And so he actually did that. And I said, they're looking for somebody to sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," and Mark, would you consider that? No. Mark, would you consider that? Paused. Next thing you know, all right, I'll do it. So he grabs the mic, and in perfect Mark Russell style, he doesn't just sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." He starts with "Katie Casey was baseball man." Went through the whole introduction to it, and finally said, "Now everybody!" And he got everybody standing up, and the place was packed at the time. "Take me out to the ball game," and Mark covered the day. So that's my Mark Russell story. Mark Altshuler.
Get it, Mark.
So I'll try to yell since we don't have a microphone. I think Greg just told a Mark Russell story, but it's also a story about how persuasive Greg Peterson is. He got Mark Russell to perform. I guess that's not that hard. But anyway, I also have a ballpark story about this ballpark. We used to come here once a summer from Chautauqua. I think it was about 2006, Sunday afternoon to see a ball game. By the way, if you haven't been here, I think you're experiencing a really beautiful ballpark. Love this place. So we had a group like this. We were out under that tent, and you know what the weather's like in western New York. It went from weather like this to the skies opening up, rain, rain, rain. So what do you do during a rain delay? Usually you go home. That's not what we did. We stayed and listened to Mark Russell do shtick. He was in the mood to perform, and he was in rare form that night. Here's my memory. There was a 8-year-old girl named Judith Fisher from Chicago. I didn't see her from 2006 until last summer. So now she's 22 or 23 years old. We reminisced about that night. That's Aaron McCarthy's daughter. Precocious kid. She kind of became Mark Russell's straight man. So I've been hanging out at Chautauqua since 1996. One of the best nights of my life was under that tent, listening to Mark Russell perform during a rain delay.
Mark, before you leave, will you repeat the poem you wrote for Mark?
I don't have it.
I was going to bring it. I thought
Sorry.
You remember.
All right, you got the voice. Paul, step up.
No.
No story? Okay.
Long story. We need to get
Mark.
to people.
Tell the story.
My name's Mark Wiseman. My dad was a good friend of Mark's, and it was a real honor to be in that relationship. And I've made Mark Russell laugh on several occasions, which I call an accomplishment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dad, my name is Jim Lynch. My dad was also friends with Mark Russell, and that friendship led to the greatest night I ever spent at Chautauqua. It was Comedy Week a few years ago. And Kelly Carlin had rented the house next to us. She had an amazing party, but my dad was in his late 80s. He's gone now, but we sat with Mark, and one by one, all the comics that were there for Comedy Week came and sat for an audience with Mark. And I got to meet one of my all-time comedy heroes, Alan Zweibel. I guess we all know he worked with Sally Love on the dirtiest comedy routine ever in Chautauqua the next day.
Yeah, thank you.
Mark taught teamwork, believe it or not. I was here once, and he put me together with Jimmy Rosselli. And then we were at our porch, and Jim Rosselli tells his story of going to the Joe DiMaggio, the game where he was going to hit one more game, number 57 or 58, and Rosselli got a flat tire on the way there, and they missed the game. And so Mark could put anybody together, and you could tell a story, and he was always on first.
Well, my wife, Donna, first saw him perform at the Shoreham Hotel in Washington in 1965. And I was at a meeting there in 1973. That was the first time I saw him perform, and we saw him every night. But one thing happened that I used to remind him about. He was in the middle of his gig, and a man cut behind him just to get a shortcut on the little stage he had there on the floor. And like he was here, and here comes the guy behind him, not meaning any harm, not even thinking about it. He goes and he sits down. I told Mark about had a heart attack. He said, "Sir, please don't ever do that." He was afraid somebody was maybe coming after him, didn't like his humor. But just a couple of jokes from back then. He said he was in the lobby, this is 1973, and there were two old men there, and the one man had a long face. And he said, "What's the matter with you?" And he said, "How would you feel if you had syphilis at 75? And the other old guy said, "Don't feel bad, I had Penn Central at 110. And then he told about, he said, most people don't know this, but Hubert Humphrey was captured by the Nazis in World War II. And after 3 days of intensive interrogation, they said to him, "We have ways to make you stop talking." So anyway, I used to remind him of those, and he did a couple of those at his 90th birthday party. And his jokes stayed with us for years. I even have some of his book that he wrote. So we loved the guy, and he was a good friend, and always was uplifting to talk to.
This is a long one, okay? So you have to hang in with me. Mark was Roman Catholic, okay? And used to go to Mass every Sunday. And over the years that I'd known him, 20, 30 years, when you tell him a joke, he would kind of smile, but, it was like, don't tell me, I tell jokes, you don't, okay? One day we're talking on the street, and I said, "I have a joke for you. 4 guys and a woman are having breakfast at a diner after Mass at 8 o'clock in the morning. So they're talking, and one of the guys says, "So Jim, how is your kid doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm thrilled with him. He says, he just became a priest, and he wears a collar, and he comes in, and people say, oh, Father this and Father that," and so deferential with him. Next guy says, "I know what you're talking about because my son's a bishop." And he comes in, and he's got a key, and he's got a special outfit, and they say, "Your Grace." "Hello, Your Grace, it's so good to have you." Other guy says, "My son's a cardinal." And when he walks in the room, people say, "Your Eminence." And they bow, and they say, "Your Eminence," and he has a special outfit on, a crimson hat. Fourth guy said, "You have to go with me on this." He says, "My son is the Pope." When he walks in the room, he's got the silk outfit on, he's got the red Gucci leather shoes, and they kneel, and they kiss his ring, and they say, "Your Holy Father." So they say to the woman, "Do you have a son?" She says, "No, unfortunately I don't. So I just have a daughter. She's 5'10", blonde, 42, 28, 36. And when she walks into the room, people say, "Oh my God!" Now, with that, the next day, and he laughed his head off. He laughed his head, legitimately laughed. The next day I meet him on the brick walk, uncontent. And he says to me, "Paul, that was a great joke you told me yesterday. I just want to get some of the facts right because I'd like to tell it again." "What were her measurements?" That was better than the original.
I'm sure some of this has been very funny. Truth is, I learned long ago, if you have to do something about near, around, concerning Mark Russell, don't try to be funny because it's not going to be funny.
Yeah.
So I would like to start by saying my name is Dave Tabish. Mark and I did about seven small skits together over an 8-year period. Bob says 8. So over a 9-year period, one of which never made it off the cutting floor because of rights. And during that time, I learned the meaning of a phrase that I've always wondered about when I hear people speaking about it. And it is an honor and a privilege. The second time, third time, Bob said to me, we're going to do this thing again, and Mark would like to work with you. It was such an honor. And the privilege of standing next to him when he had one of his moments, and you could see it sort of bubbling and coming, was just something I will always cherish. My very first, two stories, short ones. My very first moment with Mark was a show where Mark was in a psychiatric ward, and Bob thought it would be great because Mark Russell was such a great name, and they were going to put him in a straitjacket. The audience will go wild, right? And so in rehearsal, the first thing Mark got into it, and I think he realized how confined he was, he said, how long am I going to be in this thing? Because he couldn't use all the Russell talent, right? But the scene that we did, I was a psychiatrist, and we interviewed. And it went well in rehearsal, it went well in performance, line. And then the moment came where I asked a question, and I saw these eyes light up, and he said something, nothing to do with the script. The audience went wild, and I thought, okay, what do I do? Do I just say the next line? And luckily with that time, the muses, once in my life, were with me, gave me a line, I don't know what it was, but I threw it back at him. The audience went wild, and Mark sort of jaw dropped slightly, eyes went, and then he started snickering. After the show, and a lot of Mark's relatives were there, so after the show, this guy comes up to me, shakes my hand, and says, I'm Mark's cousin. You topped Mark Russell. And I held that for a while until I realized after working with him several times, especially when we were done rehearsing, we'd be sitting around talking, and every once in a while I'd think, I'm going to say something funny, right? And I'd say it, and Mark would look at me like this. And I was like, so I learned just shut up, shake your head, laugh, listen, and enjoy. But the real lesson I learned from him was something I learned from an undergrad prof originally. It is what I call humble, professional humanism. The man was a genius talent-wise, but when, as a working actor, you're around technology, and especially some of the young technicians who were setting wires and that, and they didn't know exactly, they're doing, and Mark just sat calmly and waited. And once in a while he'd say to me, you think that should be done like that? But it was, they're doing their job, you give them your time, how gracious can you be? And then he'd shift out of, when it was time, out of neutral and into first gear and just go again. So I will, for the rest of my life, thank the Lord above that I had the opportunity to work with Mark. And tonight, look, folks, we all know who's on first.
I said my dad and Mark were good friends. It was beyond, they had an amazing, great relationship. And Mark Russell came into Cleveland, Ohio to perform at an event where my dad was being honored. And he did it gratis. And it is something that our family has cherished ever since. Thanks.
Mark worked with our play reading group for 14 years, and it was an incredibly wonderful experience, except once. So, Dave may remember this, but I had the audacity to give Mark directions about something. I don't even remember what it was. And Mark says to me, you are such a good director. Now go sit down. I'll figure it out. He was such a kind and such a talented man, and I miss him. Thank you.
I got one more. There was a second story, but I got verklempt. The last time I worked with Mark, it was not just been his 90th birthday. At his birthday party, he was like a 20-year-old sparkling the first time on Ed Sullivan. It was amazing, but he still had a little trouble moving. So Bob brought him out in a pushing a wheelchair, great bit. And then he sat for the rest of the skit. But he struggled in the rehearsals trying to get from the wheelchair to the seat. And so I said, wait a minute, let me work this out, because I have directed. So I said, Mark, all you got to do is get it over there. Use the wheelchair, because if you lean on that table, it wobbles. He sat. Then I reshifted Gwen so she could do the scene. I said, and then I'll pull her out, turn her around, and then you can go for curtain call. All worked beautifully. After Mark came up to me, took my hand and said, and I'm going to quote myself when I'm working with actors, especially second tier like me, and I'm going to say, Mark Russell said to me, thank you for saving my ass from falling on the ground.
So I'll be real quick here. First of all, what occurs to me when Bob McClure and David Tavish talk, Mark Russell spent his career filling up a stage by himself with the piano. I think you probably gave him a great gift by collaborative work that he got to do, which he didn't often get to do. But also it occurs to me, even though we're all Chautauquans, people here might not know each other, and I hope if that's the case, you get to know each other. Allie Russell's going to throw out a first pitch. We have to support her. Are you nervous about this? I think she's nervous about this, so we're going to help her get not nervous. The only other thing I wanted to say is this evening happened because Greg Peterson bought tickets in Mark Russell's name, which I think is a great way to honor him. He was a baseball fan and he knew his baseball history, so we just should thank Greg.
My name is Sherry Castle, and 8 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we did a play reading in Bob and Sally's living room. This had to be 10 years ago. Bob and Sally's living room, and it was somebody that Mark knew that wanted this play read for people. So I got to play his wife, and I mean, I think, didn't he come out? He thought we were supposed to have costumes, and he came all dressed up in some crazy thing, and the rest of us are just in, our everyday clothes, but didn't bother him, off he goes. So we did that, it was great. But then after that, around the grounds, he would say, oh, there's my wife. And I'm looking around, oh, is Allie here? So I had the honor of being his wife for maybe an hour. And he always remembered it. It was very special.
All right, I'll follow up on that. Yeah, I first met Mark Russell at that very play reading, and
Your name, Pick?
oh, I'm sorry, I'm Dana Pless, and I'm Sherry's husband, Sherry Castle's husband. I first met Mark at that play reading, and that was, we didn't have really much of a chance to interact much, but years later, when I started coming on the grounds pretty regularly, I got to know Mark much better through the cigar circle. And there's a few of us out there that would smoke cigars with him. And I remember when I first got into the cigar circle, Mark shows up on his scooter, and I said, do you remember me? And he said, yeah, I was married to your wife for a while. He was so wonderful, and when it was more like Mark holding court than it was smoking cigars, but the cigars just made it extra special. And I remember times when Mark was feeling great, he was, just as chipper as he could be. And then there were times when Mark didn't feel that great, but when he sat down at the table at his home on his back porch, as soon as he sat down, he just held court. And he loved an audience, and we loved him.
Two other things that came to mind. One, it was...
This is part of the Chautauqua Minute moment, isn't it? Yeah.
I'm Bill Bates. Bookmark here and I nominated him, and he accepted to be a giant of Chautauqua. So a couple years before COVID, he got voted in as a giant, and what I thought was his gift to all of us as a country was through his satire and his humor. He held a mirror up to us and showed us our faults, our foibles, and for those of us who could follow him, he made us, I think, a better people and a better country. That was really the gift behind all that humor of his. But I have one story I'll pass on. I pass on to our short story group, where a couple hundred years ago, and I was talking to a friend of mine who just came back from over in near Russia in Norway. And back 150 years ago, when the borders were all changing, Mark told a story. This little boy goes running into his father and says, "Dad, Dad, the borders have changed again. We're no longer in Russia, we're now part of Poland." And his dad says, "Thank God, I was so sick of those winters."
My name is Monty Thompson. 10 years ago I was cast, David Zinman cast me in a play with Mark Russell. And I got the email that I was going to be in this play, and I was playing a Russian conductor, and Mark Russell was going to be in it, Jane Sturtevant was going to be in it, and somebody else I forget. So I know the date, I show up for my rehearsal, I forgot completely about everything about it. So I go around and introduce myself. "Hi, my name is Monty. Nice to meet you." I come to this little old man, nice looking, pink skin, but old and feeble. "Hi, my name is Monty." "Oh, my name is Mark." And I went back and I'm running my lines, and rehearsal's called. The lights go on. All of a sudden, Mark stands up. He's 6'6", 35 years old, pink skin, full head of blonde hair, and he's Mark Russell. And he commanded that stage from the moment he was on to the moment he was off. And then he became a nice little man again. That was my story. Thank you.
I want to hear this one.
I'm going to keep it quick. My name is Matt Cragen. Mark Russell's gift to me was being the young one of the group. But seriously, a guy that had a million stories, that have seen a million places, 10 times cooler than I'll ever see in my whole life, and he would still sit there and be waiting for your story. He was always waiting for your story. And thank you to Allie to always putting up with our nonsense and hosting us and occasionally bringing us some treats.
My name is Andy Yarts. I've been coming to Chautauqua all my life, and I didn't know Mark Russell and don't have any real actual personal connection to him, but I remember coming. One of the concerts that stands out to me from the amphitheater from when I was really little was the Capitol Steps, and they were fantastic. I was probably 10 years old or something, and I remember they did a joke in the middle of the set where one of them said to the other, "I know Mark Russell, and you, sir, are no Mark Russell." And that has stood out to me ever since. I'm sure I saw Mark Russell also on stage, but that was a defining moment for me as a child that has stuck with me for more than 30 years.
That's a good one.
On that note, try to top that one.